To call this meeting to order of Orangeville Town Council for Monday, July the 11th. Could we have a motion to approve the agenda, please? Councillor Andrews, second by Councillor Taylor. All in favor? Very good. Any disclosures of direct or indirect pecuniary interest? Seeing none, could we have a motion to move into closed, please? Deputy Mayor, second by Councillor Peters. All in favor? Okay, we'll see you at the other link, folks. Would like to welcome everyone back to the Orangeville Town Council meeting for Monday, July the 11th, 2022. First of all, we'd like to have the singing of our national anthem. Mr. Bonato.
O Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love in all of us command. With glowing hearts we see thee rise, the true north strong and free. From far and wide, O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. God keep our land glorious and free. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee.
Thank you again to David Nairn, the Artistic Director of Theatre Orangeville, reminding us of what a great country we live in. We'd like to acknowledge the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe people, including the Ojibwe, Potawatomi, and Odawa of the Three Fires Confederacy. This meeting is being aired on public television and are streamed live and may be taped for later public broadcast or webcast. Your name is part of the public record and will be included in the minutes of this meeting. Any member of the public connecting via telephone is reminded to press *6 to mute and unmute. Please remain muted until the chair requests comments or questions from the public. Earlier this evening, we had a closed session of council. Although there was intended to be some additional content, the report was not ready. The only thing we did was approve the closed council minutes of June the 27th, 2022. Can we have a motion, please, again, on approval of those minutes? Councillor Taylor, second by Councillor Post, all in favor?
Yes.
Very good, thank you. Moving on to item 10, could we have a motion to adopt the minutes of the council meeting of June 27th, 2022? Councillor Andrews, second by Councillor Taylor, all in favor?
Yes.
Thank you. Moving on to item 11.1, we have Mr. Aman Singh, Senior Partner of SLBC Inc., and Thomas Uda, the Engagement Manager for SLBC Inc., regarding the asset management plan for core infrastructure assets. Madam Treasurer Nandini Syed wishes to provide an introduction and overview. Madam Treasurer.
Thank you, Worship. Through you to Council. I'm very excited to present 2022 Asset Management Plan for our core infrastructure assets. So before I hand over the presentation to Mr. Singh from SLBC, I would like to take a few moments, Your Worship, through your permission, to thank a few people. And I'll start with our corporate champions, including Mr. Brennan, Mr. Kosalak, as well as our two other GMs, Ms. McKinney and Mr. Osmond. I also like to thank our infrastructure services team and our GIS team for their contribution and their hard work, frankly. And finally, last but not least, Ms. Mandeep Jaj, because this took almost an 18-month undertaking. So I thank her for keeping us on time and on task. That said, Your Worship, once again to your council, what I would like to point out as you're taking in the presentation as to be presented by Mr. Singh momentarily, I want you to keep three key points or to consider three key points. First and foremost, this asset management plan is based on Ontario Regulation 588-17. What that essentially means that in recent years, the province has asked municipalities to follow a very standardized template as they deliver their asset management plan. And this is the first iteration of the three plans that municipalities will be deliberating on until 2025. The next point to consider is the funding gap or the funding shortfall that you have seen already in the presentation as well as in the document. We're looking at an aggregate 3.1 million for transportation, stormwater, water, and wastewater. Now, this 3.1 million aggregate number is only the baseline. As we become more mature in terms of gathering data, may that be through condition assessment, we will have a more refined number to present to council. Also, this particular number only reflects our core assets. So in 2024, we will be presenting a similar plan for a non-core asset, and around that time, we will have a much better understanding of what the final number is going to be. The final point that I would like to make, and of course, council will have the opportunity to ask questions. Myself and Mr. Kosalak will join Mr. Singh at the end of this presentation. So the final point that I would ask council to consider as you're listening in is some of the recommendations that have been made in the document, particularly the financial recommendations. Once again, these are recommendations partly because of the compliance and partly because the province is looking for municipalities to be fully financially sustainable as it relates to their service delivery as well as asset management. That said, I will hand over to Mr. Singh. Thank you.
All right. Welcome again, Mr. Singh and Mr. Uda. Go ahead, sir.
Good evening, members of council. My name is Aman Singh with SLBC, and it's my pleasure today to present to you the 2022 Asset Management Plan for the town's core assets, which consist of transportation, water, wastewater, and stormwater assets. For our agenda today, we'll start with an overview of asset management, and then I'll provide a summary of the key sections of the asset management plan, including the state of local infrastructure, levels of service, risk management, life cycle strategies, and financial strategies. We'll close with some next steps, and we've also allocated time for questions and answers. So there's a lot of jargon in the asset management world and views on what it is and what it isn't. Many organizations think asset management is about maintenance management, and others think it's about having in place asset management technology enablers and systems. But ultimately, what you're trying to achieve from an asset management program is the lowest cost of asset ownership in an environment of limited resources while delivering services your customers and regulators require at acceptable levels of risk. And this can be achieved by striking the right balance between the levels of services you provide together with cost of service and risk. The asset management plan prepared for the town and being presented today is based on data and information that is currently available. This means that the condition profiles, risk exposure limits, and funding and financial gaps presented in the asset management plan may be under or overestimated, as they were based in part by assumptions and staff input where current data was unavailable. At the same time, I wanted to note that the town has made significant progress in improving asset data and information needed to inform and enable good decision making. In the development of asset management plans and forecasts, we strive for progress and not perfection, as the development of these plans is an iterative process that involves improving governance, business processes, systems, and data over time. So we'll jump into the first chapter of the asset management plan. The state of local infrastructure focuses on the replacement value, average age, and condition profiles of the town's core assets. The town's current portfolio of transportation, water, wastewater, and stormwater assets has a total replacement value of approximately $968 million. This figure shows the average age of the town's transportation assets in blue. Overall, on average, the road and sidewalk portfolio are approaching midlife, while bridges and culverts are past midlife. Similarly, the town's stormwater, water, and wastewater assets are also nearing midlife. I'll note here that the town has a planned replacement program for its water meters, which are at end of life. This slide shows the town's condition profile categorized from very good to very poor, along with the replacement value of its core asset portfolios. In general, as you can see here, the town's core asset portfolios have a favorable condition profile, with about 81% of transportation assets, 82% of water assets, 75% of wastewater assets, and 97% of stormwater assets being in fair or better condition. A key point to note is that the goal is not to have all your assets in very good condition because it's not practical from a cost perspective, but rather to focus on allocating your resources on the right assets at the right time so your critical assets remain in a good state of repair, and assets that are sliding into the poor and very poor categories are non-critical and have little impact on service delivery if they do fail. This is a financially prudent approach to supporting the long-term financial sustainability for any municipality. One of the reasons these conditions profiles look good is because long-lived assets like roads and pipes exhibit a slow deterioration initially, then a rapid one as they get closer to end of life, and the town's assets are relatively young. So the town has an opportunity now to be proactive and to get ahead of its peers that are experiencing massive backlogs of O&M and renewal works and condition profiles that are a lot worse with assets sitting in poor and very poor categories. In terms of levels of services document the services and service measures the town provides to its residents and businesses. The regulation for asset management plans prescribes key levels of service measures that need to be reported on. These include, for transportation assets, the average pavement condition index. Here we can see the town's average pavement condition index is 82.4, which denotes an overall good condition rating. For stormwater assets, the regulation requires reporting on the percent of the town's stormwater system resilient to a 5-year storm. Here we see that 100% of the town's stormwater system has been reported to be in compliance with that measure, primarily based on the town's design standards, which require 10-year storm design. This measure will be further investigated and supported by future actions recommended by the town's climate change adaptation plan. For water assets, the level of service that is prescribed for reporting is the number of lost connection days per year due to water main breaks. The town had an average of 48 lost connection days per 10,000 properties. Similarly, for wastewater assets, the number of lost connection days per year due to wastewater backups was 3 lost connection days per 10,000 properties. A high-level risk assessment was also completed as part of the development of the asset management plan. Here we can see a heat map that shows the value of assets in low, medium, and high risk. High-risk assets are those that have a high consequence of failure to the town if they fail based on triple bottom line impacts, and also have a high probability of failure due to poor condition. Assets falling into the high-risk zone are generally candidates for renewal or capital interventions in the short term. Here we can see approximately $13.6 million or 1.7% of the assets fall into the high-risk zone, made up primarily of large sanitary sewers and water mains that have reached end of life. In the normal course of business, you would expect to have a spread of assets sitting in the low, medium, and high-risk zones, as it's not financially practical to minimize risks across your portfolio at any one given point in time. In terms of lifecycle management strategies, lifecycle management provides an understanding of the funding needs for the asset portfolio over the next 10 years, as well as a measure of the infrastructure gap, which is the difference between the resources needed for the asset portfolio and the allocated budget. The town projects roughly $13.8 million of planned expenditure over the next 10 years across its core asset portfolio, primarily to fund road urbanization, road widening projects, pond retrofits, and the new elevated Northwest Sector water storage facility. And from an average annual capital renewal need, approximately $13.7 million is forecast over the next 10 years for strategies related to resurfacing and reconstructing roads, rehabilitation of bridges and culverts, replacement of critical sewers at end of life, replacement of water mains at end of life, stormwater pond upgrades, and rehabilitation and replacement of water and wastewater facility assets. This investment will maintain the town's current condition profile over the next 10 years. So looking at the financial side of things, we'll now look at the financial needs for the core asset portfolio. So this figure shows the needs for the transportation and stormwater portfolios. We've broken out the needs for the water and wastewater assets because they are rate-based, and then the tax-based assets, which are stormwater and transportation. The black line shows the current average budget over the next 10 years, which is $5.4 million per year. The purple line shows the 10-year average annual need, which is $7.2 million per year. And the red line shows the 10-year average annual need with the 13% cost escalator, which is being observed due to macro and microeconomic influences. So the current funding gap is estimated to be $1.8 million per year, but in reality, around $2.8 million a year with the 13% cost inflation escalator that's being observed across the market. This figure shows the similar needs for the water and wastewater portfolio. Again, the black line shows the current average budget over the next 10 years, which is $5.2 million. The blue line shows the 10-year average annual need, which is $6.5 million. And the red line shows the 10-year average annual need with the 13% cost escalator at $7.4 million. So the current funding gap for the water and wastewater assets is $1.3 million per year, but you're likely to observe it to be closer to $2.1 million per year with the 13% cost escalator applied. In general, the town can leverage 4 strategies to address the current gaps. The first would be to increase funding from existing sources, including taxes, debt, grants, and third-party contributions. The second would be to implement a stormwater user fee, which is becoming quite prevalent among your peers. The third would be to reduce capital needs, and the fourth would be to reduce levels of services, which essentially means you'd be doing deferrals of asset interventions on the short-term basis. Similar options can be considered for the water and wastewater gap and will be addressed in the next iteration of the town's water and wastewater study. So here, the percentages for the different strategies is just one mix of how you can pull the 4 levers of funding from existing sources, implementing a stormwater fee, reduction in capital needs, and then reduction in levels of services or deferrals. Several continuous improvement opportunities have been identified to improve the confidence in the 10-year forecast, including CCTV sewer inspections, a further detailed breakdown of the water and wastewater facility inventories and condition assessments, stormwater bathymetric surveys, and implementation of recommendations from the town's climate change and adaptation plan. In terms of next steps, the town will commence working on the asset management plan for its non-core assets, which will need to be completed by 2024 July, per the regulation for asset management plans, and asset management plans for proposed levels of services, which will need to be completed by July of 2025. With that, I'd like to thank you for your time and would be more than happy to answer any questions.
All right. Well, thank you, Mr. Singh. Councillors, any questions of Mr. Singh on this presentation? I've got one, Mr. Singh. I'm just wondering, how did you go about determining road conditions? Just out of curiosity.
Correct. So my colleague Thomas Uda is also online in case we need a more detailed answer, but generally the roads condition is determined by the roads needs assessment, which essentially looks segment by segment at the road pavement condition index, provides a measure of distresses, and then we forecast from there what the life cycle interventions needs would be.
All right, thank you. But is there actually a physical inspection?
To you, Mr. Brown, Mayor Brown, yes, it's basically a PCI, pavement condition score, that's assigned to every segment through a visual inspection of the road. So the town completes that, hires a consultant to complete that roads needs study every certain number of years, so that they always have an up-to-date condition score, basically out of 100 for every single pavement section for the town.
Right. Good, thank you. Got Councillor Taylor and then Councillor Andrews. Go ahead, Councillor Taylor.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. So thank you again, Mr. Singh, for your presentation. It was I enjoyed reading it very much. It made me feel very planful, and I like being planful because I don't like emergencies or unexpected tax levies, as this council would attest to, I'm sure. My question is and I read with great interest the money deficit. That's where my concern was. And you had some great suggestions of where to go. I guess, you know, it's probably going to be the next council that would determine exactly what would happen with this as part of the budget process. But I guess my question to you is that assessment piece, and you mentioned some other municipalities have done that with some great success. I think of that as just another tax, and I'm not diminishing the fact we'd have to come up with that money if there is a $2.8 million gap. And I loved your graph, by the way, brilliant graph of explaining it. But what would your mentoring be for this group on the best way to fund that gap? Like, you gave us the explanations, but you didn't necessarily give us, you know, your gold star. I wonder what your thoughts would be on that.
So through your worship, I'll ask Ms. Saeed if she wants to take a first crack at it, or I can provide my humbled opinion on that.
We're going to hear from Ms. Saeed regardless of whether or not we ask her or not.
Okay, so through the mayor to the councillor, I do agree with you that ultimately there's one taxpayer. So whether you push that money through rates or a special levy or a user rate, it ultimately comes down to the taxpayer. I would answer the question in two ways. The first way would be that most municipalities are moving towards a philosophy of intergenerational equity, which is a moving away from the pay-as-you-go philosophy, because essentially what's happening is you have these deficits and they grow. We're essentially just kicking the can down the street to our children or grandchildren. And there's going to come a council that can no longer defer a 5, 7, 9, 10% tax increase.
Yeah.
So that's the first perspective, would be that regardless of how you pull the funding through, it does ultimately need to come through the taxpayer. So my first recommendation would be to start addressing it in the long term. You are in a good position in the sense that you have some runway to address that nice condition profile. However, it will start to degrade on you very quickly, because assets will tend to degrade kind of in a bowed-shaped degradation curve. So you get a nice and slow degradation and then a very rapid one. The idea behind the user rate on the stormwater asset is essentially to dedicate that rate so the stormwater folks don't need to compete with it against the other folks looking for tax dollars. Typically, it's very easy to give cash to police and fire and ambulances and things we consider more important than stormwater. And across every single municipality that I've worked for in the last 18 years, stormwater assets have been the neglected asset, to the point now where they want a dedicated fund to essentially allocate to those assets. So either the idea behind the dedicated stormwater fee is that they don't have to compete against services that are deemed more important, essentially. I'm not sure, did that answer your question, Councillor?
No, it does. Your worship, may I ask just a quick follow-up?
Go ahead.
As I understand the allocation piece, so if you were just to have a stormwater segment, if you were a heavy user, you would pay more, correct, under that scenario?
Correct. So in most municipalities, what we find is that the residents are being subsidized by the businesses and the super centers with large parking lots. And so the idea would be that you would typically set a rate based on the needs in the asset management plan. And then there would be a policy going forward that if residents were to do, let's say, take away impervious surface from their land by putting in concrete or other sort of upgrades, then there would be a special tax to that as well, because they're impacting the ability of the natural environment to absorb the stormwater and sort of deal with it.
Thank you, sir.
Before I ask Councillor Andrews to ask his question, I just want to interject on that point. You know, we recently had conversations with some residents who were concerned about paving front yards and paving backyards. Councillor Peters and I had an off-the-line conversation about this, and Councillor Peters did let me know that there are other municipalities who are putting in place, I don't know if penalty is the right word, but if you are going to create impervious surfaces in today's world concerned with stormwater collection and what have you, that you're going to have to pay to play, so to speak. And I see Mr. Singh nodding his head. So I think as we move forward, whether it's this council or the next council, there's going to have to be some consideration for whether or not we allow people to pave their backyards. You know, I've thought about, you know, the flooding that's happened in Orangeville over the past 5 years, and it seems to be a great deal more than in the 30 years that I've lived here. And when I look at, you know, Google Earth maps of Orangeville, we see the west side of Orangeville has been developed from farmland when I arrived here to now small footprint homes with you know, hard surface roofs, hard surface driveways, very small backyards, a lot of paving and sidewalk and impervious surfaces, and therefore the water's got nowhere to go but into the stormwater system, and in some cases it gets overwhelmed. So we need to really think about that going forward. And of course, climate action plans that we see at Dufferin County and town of Orangeville are going to be pointing to this, and hopefully we can curtail some of these hard surfaces and maybe think about it in new developments as well, that we need to think about this and what we deal with, how we deal with water in a better way than we're doing right now. Councillor Andrews, go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Your Worship, and good evening, Mr. Singh and Mr. Uda. Appreciate your participation in our meeting, and with a lot of interest, I read your report as well as the staff report. A lot to think about, and again, you know, I think one takeaway that I had from your report was, in fact, you know, applying a prudent approach here for the long term on all of the assets that are identified. As part of this report, and again, it may come up in the staff discussion in the next item on the agenda, but are there provisions for those unexpected items? As you've referenced the life cycle of all the assets, you know, we're kind of at a midpoint. I call it kind of the midpoint, not to say mid-cycle crisis, far from that, but, you know, there are certain points that were highlighted in the various graphs, but or is there a provision for those unexpected surprises, or I don't want to use the term catastrophes, but there are things that can happen. You know, failures occur with, you know, various assets that have been identified. Has that been embedded in some way with the projection that is identified in each year of this report?
So generally speaking, there's two numbers that are primarily in the financial forecast. The one is the budget, and the budget would not really account for what's needed or any surprises. The need, essentially, the financial need, where you're getting the gap between the budget and the infrastructure need, is essentially looking at the lifecycle management activities that need to be completed to get to the lowest lifecycle cost, but also to address your current backlog of assets that are in condition states that need to be addressed. So the answer to your question is no. It doesn't cater for any surprises. The idea, I guess, here is that, generally speaking, as you're putting in more rigorous business processes related to risk assessment and understanding what assets you need to intervene on in terms of operations, maintenance, renewal, upgrading, capital interventions, that you're reducing some of that risk and uncertainty. So when you have a mature risk management program and you have a proactive approach to managing your assets, typically one of the outcomes of that is you have less surprise failures. Now, it doesn't mean you're not going to have any, but what it does mean is likely the failures you have are not going to be of critical infrastructure because you're prioritizing and intervening ahead of the failures there. In terms of that, in addition to the need, and one of the things that aren't really addressed in asset management plans, primarily because there's always a gap, is the idea that you would want to have a reserve or a slush fund of some sorts to address some of the surprise failures that ultimately come up. And I'm sure Ms. Saeed will have more background in terms of what you guys are doing in the background there.
Madam Treasurer, if you could weigh in on the reserve for Mr. Taylor or for Mr. Andrews, excuse me, and the rest of council.
Yes, thank you, Worship, through you to Councillor Andrews. Now, I believe Councillor Andrews' question was perhaps alluding more towards system failures or asset failures. But that said, I think one of the, if not a catastrophe, but one of the things we did factor in, and as Mr. Singh was presenting, you have seen that for most projection, we have factored in a 13% inflationary increase. So part and parcel of that factoring in is because we're going through a massive inflation right now, and this probably won't die down. Even if it does come down sometime in 2023 or 24, the prices of goods and services will not necessarily go. The inflation may come down or, revert back, but the prices of goods and services will not go back to pre-inflation era. So I think that's a nugget of information I can offer to Councillor Andrews in terms of factoring in those unpredictable circumstances or scenarios. I hope that answers your question, Councillor Andrews.
It does, Madam Treasurer, and I think that, Mr. Singh's take on this too as well is that you have built in, for the most part, those abilities to replace in a timely fashion those assets that do require replacement. And that hopefully will end up reducing, the potential of any catastrophe that occurs. But there are those anomalies that occur, as we know, 100-year flood or rain, and you have to sometimes prepare for that. And I know that, Madam Treasurer, you've spoken about our reserves, so I'm very satisfied with the answers I've received. Thank you.
And just through the mayor to the councillor, just one more thing that came to mind. Generally, what happens if you do have a catastrophe, you have a budget laid out, and a catastrophe happens or money is requested, let's say in Q1 after the budget is finalized. Typically what the organization has to do is they have to accommodate that surprise failure or catastrophe. And what that means is something that they've planned has to be deferred. So while you're addressing it, that deferral actually means that you're going to pay a little bit more tomorrow or next year for the interventions that you had to defer to accommodate that surprise failure. So one way or the other, you're paying for it, but there is the ability to absorb it. Ultimately, that's probably not the best way to deal with it. You want to minimize surprise failures by being more proactive in control of which assets are failing and which ones are not.
Yeah, just my final comment. Again, I was very happy to hear the approach that is being proposed here, as opposed to deferring it to, the kids, or the grandkids further down, because again, as you've been very clear, it would end up costing just an exorbitant amount of money that, you may find a juncture point where you wouldn't be able to afford it. So it makes a lot of sense, and it is a prudent approach. Thank you again.
Thank you, Councillor Andrews. It's we learned a harsh lesson on asset management in the last year when the Broadway sidewalk project was pushed back, costing in the order of an extra $1 million. It's very unfortunate. Councillor Taylor, go ahead, sir.
Yes, thank you, sir. I just wanted to state, I really do like the idea of being prudent, and to the treasurer's point, the 13%. I mean, we just don't know what that's going to be, and we've seen unprecedented inflation to start the year. Nonetheless, I was in a meeting earlier today and talking about commodities, and they've come off substantially over the last month. So I don't know if we're going to be in this for a long time, and it's all hyperbole at this point, but I don't think it's going to be as bad as it has been, and we can argue 13% or 6% or what have you. I think it's prudent that it's there. I just think that's an awfully pessimistic number at this point in terms of where we're going.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. All right, any further questions, councillors, at this moment before we move on? Okay, Mr. Singh, Mr. Uda, thank you very much for your presentation. We'd like you to hang around for the staff report component here as we move on to 12.1. So 12.1 is our asset management plan for core infrastructure assets. It's report CPS 2022-054. The recommendation is that the report CPS 2022-054 asset management plan for core infrastructure assets be received and the council approve the 2022 asset management plan as presented. Could we have a motion to put this on the floor, please? Councillor Andrews, second by Councillor Sherwood. Madam Treasurer, do you wish to make any further comments here, or are you looking for questions from council?
Your Worship, I'm just looking for a question at this point.
Right. Councillors, any further questions on this report and recommendation? Seeing none, all in favor? All right. Thank you, Madam Treasurer. Thank you, Mr. Singh, Mr. Uda, for your report. And let's hope, as Councillor Taylor said, that the pending doom isn't quite as severe as some are thinking. I hope not. Okay, moving on to 12.2, false alarm calls, CPS 2022-010. This is a recommendation that the report CPS 2022-010 false alarm calls be received, and that staff review and assess false alarm data provided by the OPP on a bi-weekly basis and focus on education as an initial step, and that staff report back to council during the 2023 budget process on the resourcing required to develop a false alarm bylaw and program on a permanent basis. Could we have a motion on this, please? Councillor Taylor, seconded by Councillor Andrews. I see Deputy Mayor has either a comment or a question. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you. I support this 100%. We need to do something. There's too many false alarms. I had a question and I don't know who would answer it in regards to the previous false alarm program that we had. Basically, it says after 3 false alarms, you get cut off until you pay a penalty as such. I just wanted the legalities of that. Would we not end up getting sued from a business that got broken into and things like that? I just wondered. And again, when we do finally get a false alarm program, we need to be very specific as to what is a false alarm, I think. I know on the fire end of it, you know, what is a false alarm? Is it a small fire that turned out to be nothing? That's not really a false alarm. They did have a fire. Things like that need to be really looked at. But just my comments.
Yeah. Before I ask Ms. McKinney to weigh in, because she's lit her screen up, but I'm with you, Deputy Mayor, and I looked at the current proposed bylaw. You know, what does 30-day suspension and 1-year suspension mean? I mean, you know, I would be more in favor of a monetary penalty rather than suspension. You know, as the concern for liability is there. Ms. McKinney, do you have a further comment?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the deputy, that information is for historical purposes. That's the OPS approach that was used. We wouldn't be recommending that type of suspension going forward. That being said, I do have Ms. Archer, my colleague, on the line to answer any additional questions related to that. But for context, also, this program is a response back that came from council, and our recommendation at this point would be to focus first on education to establish a baseline for the program. That would allow us to look into that for 2023 to understand the impact, and then look at what administration might look like going forward in a full step program.
Right, and as we know, as we move into the new billing model for OPP, these calls for services are going to be charged against the town, and so this education component is very important, as we all know. Councillor Taylor, go ahead. Or did you?
I think you've covered it off there, Your Worship. You're just saying comments that I wanted to make, so I appreciate we're on the same page here.
Thank you. Councillor Sherwood.
Yes, Your Worship, through you to staff. So just for clarification, the false alarm bylaw that was on record became redundant when we disbanded OPS.
Ms.
Through
McKinney?
you, Mr. Mayor, yes, we would need a new bylaw.
Okay, and follow-up question, Your Worship. So does this mean that I know the recommendation is to come back with a bylaw? Would that mean that the bylaw would only take an effect once we go to the billing model, or even under the way we are right now, being billed by OPP?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Sherwood, what we're recommending for 2023 is focus on education to understand what it would take to administer the program from a billing perspective, as well as overarching as it relates to if the council wanted to proceed with fines. So that would be following that time period that also would align more naturally to the end of the billing model.
Thank you for that clarification.
Ms. McKinney, as we've identified education to be an important component of this, are you waiting for the 2023 budget process to be completed to add resources to do that education, or do we have the resources in place now to start that education process before the budget process?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the Clerk's Department has advised they will ask bylaw to do what they can to get this started, recognizing that resources would be extremely limited. And that's why it would be at best efforts at most, but the ask would definitely be coming in the 2023 budget, particularly when we have a little bit more information about the number of the alarms and the nature of them. To the deputy's point, Ms. Archer had previously raised that in a number of cases, these are repeat alarms where something has set it off, and so early intervention may allow some mitigation.
And just as a follow-up, Ms. McKinney, I guess I just presume that from time to time, town staff does liaise with OPP on communication. And, you know, both entities really need to put the message out. I know, you know, we've seen a tremendous uptick in communication from OPP. There's a couple of staffers, Central Region and here locally, that are putting out videos. And, you know, I think, you know, if we could ask, if council is, I'm seeing some nodding heads already, that, you know, we could ask OPP to embed this in some of their communications going forward. And I know we're announcing a new communications manager for the town of Orangeville. So, you know, I'm sure that Mallory, I believe is her name, I forget the last name now, but I'm sure her plate's going to be full. But this is a very important cost-saving element that we can add to her duties going, you know, over the next 6 months or 12 months. So, okay, any further questions, councillors, on this particular item? All right, well, if there isn't anything further, all in favor of moving forward with this? Thank you very much. Okay, moving on to 12.3. This is the Business Improvement Area Levy. The recommendation is that report CPS 2022-052, the 2022 Business Improvement Area Levy be received, and the council adopt the 2022 BIA levies as proposed for the 2022 fiscal year. The council pass a bylaw to provide for the levy and collection of a special charge upon rateable property in Orangeville Business Improvement Area in the corporation of the town of Orangeville for the year 2022. And for the public that hasn't looked at this, the amount of the levy is remaining the same at $460,000. The property owners in the BIA and extended BIA area, which includes Walmart, Zara's Plaza, Boston Pizza, Best Western, all those property managers are contributing to the BIA levy. And for the most part, the money's being spent to support programming in the downtown core. Any questions, councillors, on this item? Go ahead, Councillor Sherwood.
Oh, sorry, Your Worship. I was just going to move the motion.
Okay, there we go. Let's do that. Go ahead, Councillor Sherwood, seconder on this. Deputy Mayor McIntosh. Again, any further questions or comments? All in favor? Very good. Thank you, Madam Treasurer. You might as well hang around for this one. Tax appeals, section 357 tax appeals. The recommendation is that report CPS 2022-053 regarding section 357 tax appeals for 2021 be received, and the council authorize reduction in property tax totaling $4,029.65. Could we have a motion on this, please? Councillor Andrews, second by Councillor Peters. Any questions on this, council? All right, all in favor? Thank you. Moving on to 12.1, a recommendation to adopt a new community improvement plan. This is a report INS 2022-047. Recommendation that this report regarding a recommendation to adopt a new community improvement plan, CIP, be received, and that council pass a bylaw as included in attachment number 1 to designate the town of Orangeville as a community improvement project area, and the council pass a bylaw as included in attachment number 2 to adopt the new 2022 community improvement plan for the town of Orangeville as included in attachment 3, representing a new comprehensive revitalization strategy for the community improvement project area, and the bylaw number 55-90 being the bylaw to designate the downtown community improvement project area and to adopt the Downtown Orangeville Community Improvement Plan be repealed, and that staff be directed to establish a Community Improvement Reserve Fund for implementing the 2022 Community Improvement Plan and reallocate $30,000 from the Facade Improvement Grant Program Fund within corporate allocations to the Community Improvement Reserve Fund. And that staff be directed to prepare submissions for the 2023 budget for additional funding required to administer and implement the plan and its programs. And the staff be directed to bring a follow-up report to council in the first quarter of 2023 to outline recommendations regarding the implementation of the plan and the appropriate programs to be funded in 2023. Can we have a motion to put this on the floor, please? Councillor Andrews, second by Councillor Post. All right. Do we have any questions? Councillor Sherwood, go ahead.
Yes, Your Worship, through you to staff. I'm not sure if this will go to the treasurer or go to Mr. Ward. Have we not paid out money out of that 30,000, Mr. Ward, towards facades in 2022?
Through you, Your Worship, to Councillor Sherwood, I'd have to check specifically. I believe we do have a couple of improvement grants that have pulled from that fund. It's more going forward, the intention being into 2023, that we take that fund that's traditionally allocated annually to the Facade Improvement Grant Program and basically repurpose it into a reserve fund and augment that going forward.
Oh, so in other words, we're going to transfer it over, rename it, but those expenses that we've paid out in facade grants in 2022 will come out with that, showing it at the end of the year for tracking purposes. So it will also come out of that fund when it's relocated over to that new name.
I believe that's generally correct. I'm as a planner trying to explain a more of a financial matter. If Madam Treasurer has anything to clarify, she may want to do so, but that's my simplistic understanding of the matter, and I think you're correct, Councillor Sherwood.
Okay, that sounds fine. It just the perception in the motion looks like we have the 30,000, and I believe we don't. So, but that's okay. It'll all wash out.
Madam Treasurer or Mr. Ward, is this not just a renaming or repurposing of that fund into the CIP program? Madam Treasurer, is that correct or not?
Okay, Your Worship, so let me jump in here. So a couple of things. So first of all, I think the creation of the reserve fund is essentially to dedicate the fund for more CIP purposes. So it's kind of, it gives that segregation. And in terms of, I believe we have already spent, I don't know the exact number, but I believe we have spent closer to $10,000 to $12,000 already out of the $30,000 allocated for the facade improvement grant. I forget the third question that Councillor Sherwood asked. I think you were, or is it your question, Mr. Mayor?
Well, I'm just wondering, you know, where is the consideration for future facade improvements going to come? Is it going to come through the CIP, or is the facade improvement going to survive in its current form?
To Your Worship, perhaps I could answer that one. Essentially, the program that has long existed is going to be maintained and augmented as part of the more comprehensive community improvement plan. And I think at this time, what we're suggesting going forward is, as part of next year's budget, we basically repurpose or establish a broader reserve fund to fund the broader program. And going forward, we could report back to council basically with some direction on what we recommend being the programs to launch or initiate. The CIP is really an enabling document. It contains the whole broad suite of programs that we may choose to utilize at any given time. And there's language within the plan itself, as well as the accompanying staff report that describe that a little further. So it's discretionary essentially. And what we're suggesting at this time is, as part of next year's budget, we come forward with establishing a reserve fund to more broadly fund whatever programs we choose to enact and operate as part under the CIP.
Very good. Okay, thank you. Councillor Peters and then Councillor Andrews. Go ahead, Councillor Peters.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Mr. Ward, and I'll likely have a follow-up for Mr. Osmond. I'm looking at the design guidelines in particular, and I was wondering if you could expand on when during the process and to what degree those would be enforced during the planning and approvals process.
Through your worship to Councillor Peters, the guidelines are going to be referenced with respect to assessing and evaluating applications for any one of or more of the programs that may be available at any given time for a certain development proposal. They're to serve two things. One is to guide proponents in terms of understanding what the town's expectations are for new development, redevelopment, and design, et cetera, and also assist staff in evaluating. We'd look at a proposal and assess how it achieves or aligns with the objectives and direction given in the guidelines themselves. So they'd be referred hopefully by proponents when they're conceiving or contemplating their concept, as well as by staff in evaluating and assessing those proposals coming forward.
Okay, thanks. So where I'm going is I think that's a pretty important document, and it covers a lot of important design aspects for projects that will be proposed within the town. And I guess through you, Mr. Mayor, to Mr. Osmond, and at the discretion of council, would it be possible to hold back that portion of the document for another meeting so that we could have some more time to go through it in detail and look at some of the recommendations and guidelines? Because I think, you know, there's certainly a few cases from my perspective where a little stronger language, you know, some making those requirements a little bit more robust would really elevate, you know, the types of projects that we would see and the elements that contribute to, you know, various factors in town in terms of accessibility or sustainability, things like this. So I'd hate to just only have a few days to review that document, you know, put them through in an appendix and then they don't get revisited for a while. So it, you know, I don't want to delay the process, but I think it's, you know, worth a second look at that section and really diving into some of the details to see if we can, you know, improve upon them if this is going to be a standard that now governs all the projects we're going to see over the next, you know, 5 or 10 years.
Right. And before Mr. Osmond weighs in, Councillor Peters, you know, we did have some discussion about streetscape and you know, what is Broadway going to look like, particularly the very important entryway to Orangeville off of Highway 10. And we've had a couple of proposals, one of which seemed to be, you know, roundly dismissed as being satisfactory, and that we need to look at that, you know, in a more fulsome manner, as you say. Mr. Osmond, go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Councillor Peters. It's a good question, and you know, a couple of things. First off, the CIP is a living document. CIP is the one we had in past years, of course, just kind of 30 years old now. So at the end of the day, we're adopting a new CIP plan. And there's a whole suite of processes and suite of programs under the CIP umbrella. And it is a good point that, as you know, streetscapes or landscape plans or building designs, they all change and evolve. The opportunity to amend the plan is always there in front of council. You know, you have a plan that's if it's going to be a one that we're going to work with, and it's going to last 30 years. You know, hopefully we're going to see things change over a 30-year period. That this plan might need to be adapted to, and you might want to pivot a little bit to change some things to make it more, I guess, to a standard that you want to do in the community. We do have the consultant here, and I wanted to speak to this because the process we've gone through, and certainly the manager of economic development and culture is here as well, and the planner, and a lot of work has gone into this, and the standards and all the CIPs that have been in place over the last number of years. This is a best practice document. And I think that Mr. Akazir, John Akazir, if he could just jump in and just for clarity, the ability to amend the CIP from time to time always exists. Is that correct?
Yes. Good evening. Hi, Ray and Mr. Mayor, members of council. I apologize for the backdrop here, but yeah, very much. And just listening to what everyone has said, I think firstly, Councillor Peters' point is well taken. If there's a need just to get complete satisfaction with some of the language, I don't think, from our perspective, there's an issue with doing that. But the document itself is very much a living document, as Ray said, and we would expect it to be amended certainly within 5 years. We have sort of a 5-year limit on this, and you'd review the program at that point and make the CIP as a whole, and make a determination as to whether you wish to maintain it, change the funding arrangements, or terminate it if it's met all of its goals. Throughout the province, you see more CIPs becoming sort of ongoing instruments, but they are subject to change and adaptation in order to meet a set of circumstances. So it's very much part of the economic development toolbox, but it is incumbent upon the municipal managers to make the appropriate adjustments. And it might even be that you adjust this plan after a year or 2 years, depending on the success of some of the programs. There may be some evident challenges in some of the programs that no one, even if it's best practice, no one can actually discover until the plan is put into action. So I think, as Ray says, you need to be watchful going forward in terms of implementation.
Right, Mr. Mayor, if I could, just as a final thought there, and another question occurred to me, and maybe this is to Mr. Ward or Mr. Hack, but the design guideline document in the appendix, is that meant to govern only those projects pursuing programs under the CIP, or all projects at large?
Through your worship, perhaps I can answer that. The guidelines are intended to govern and help with evaluating grant program applications and actually help staff evaluating development applications abroad. So it's quite a comprehensive document. We're getting pretty good value out of this component. It's going to help us with the CIP implementation, as well as reviewing and assessing development applications going forward.
Okay, thanks. So yeah, just as a final thought, I guess, that I think it's a very important document, and there is a lot of good stuff in there. I don't doubt that a lot of it is best practice, but I do find there's some language similar to our old official plan that is encouraging in nature rather than having a little more teeth, so to speak. And, I think certainly some of those provisions could be beefed up a little for the better. I think we can put a little more onus on the development projects without driving them away and getting some of those elements built in. So I'd hope to have a little more time to review the document. If it goes through tonight and there's some amendments that come in sidebar conversations, maybe that's okay as well. But I'd hate to amend something, only 4 weeks after we passed it. It looks a little silly. So I'll leave it at that.
I like what you're saying here, Councillor Peters. Sometimes we get some very important legislation put in front of us, and in this case, we've had 4 days to look at it, including a summer weekend. So I don't think, I personally, I'm speaking for myself, I haven't had enough time to go over this with a fine-tooth comb. And I would support actually deferring a decision to our meeting of August the 8th, if there was a motion to that effect made. So anyway, let's go on with Councillor Andrews. Are you complete there, Councillor Peters, for now? Okay, Councillor Andrews, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much, Your Worship. And more of a comment as opposed to a question. And I do appreciate tremendously the comments that Councillor Peters has brought forward, as yours as well. This is a robust document, and I do want to just make a comment regarding what Mr. Osmond was in the process of saying. I do want to take the time to thank the staff, Mr. Hack, as well, for the amount of work that has gone into this community improvement plan. It is an extensive document, and I know that many of us have taken the time to review it as best we can over this, last 4 or 5 days since we've received it. But we also had, of course, previous information that highlighted some of the information that was critical to this report. I think that the piece that I wanted to also share is the fact that, and I will say this publicly, it is absolutely critical for this to be successful that there is an individual, as is highlighted in the report, to steer this community improvement plan, one that will be able to process requests and hopefully provide some clarification to all the different components that are highlighted. And it will really be up to the next council when it comes to budgetary time to determine which parts of the 8 will be kind of moved forward. We've talked about the facade component, but there's also, of course, the others that are included in this document. But I do appreciate, again, the comments from Councillor Peters regarding the design component, because that is also somewhat of a reference guide. It is going to identify some of the things that are going to be important with some potential submissions, and it is critical that we have some clarity if we do have any questions. So that's all I have to say, Your Worship.
Very good. Thank you. Councillors, anything further here? Councillor Peters, did you want to pursue this delay or not?
I'd certainly like a little more time to review and assess the document. To Councillor Andrews' points, we have seen the CIP portion of it, but certainly the design guidelines are somewhat new to us. I guess due to Mr. Osmond, would that cause a hiccup in your budget and implementation plans, or is maybe just the design appendix something that can be delayed for the short term?
Your Worship, through you to Councillor Peters, I would prefer to see a CIP approved at least this evening, and if we wanted to take a look and pull the side document, the appendix document, and have another look at that, I prefer to do that separately. The reason being is that we're running a little bit of time here, and we want to get the CIP up and running for lots of reasons. There's a lot of work behind the scenes that's been done with this particular CIP. But I think your point is well taken. There's some of the things in the guidelines that you can always adapt, and if we could do it that way, just approve the CIP overall as recommended, and then to maybe add to the list of items recommendations that we would pull the guidelines appendix and then have that reviewed and bring that back if we can on August 8th. If at all possible, because we don't want to run into September and then we'll move forward to the new council.
Very good. So again, you want to delay the design guidelines, Councillor Peters? Is that what your thoughts are?
I'd really appreciate the opportunity to have a couple more weeks to look at them, and at the discretion of council. If we could pull just that piece as an amendment to the motion, I'd certainly be appreciative, and I'd promise the other 6 of you I'd put some good work into it to give as much insight as I could on that document.
Very good. Okay, well, I would be happy to second that if you're making that as a motion. And then perhaps we can ask Councillor Sherwood if she'd like to weigh in.
Yes, Your Worship. On the attachment number 4, there was multiple comments and questions submitted from the BIA board, and I see that there are responses on there. Were those responses communicated to the BIA, or are they just being available now for the first time? Have they been responded back to them so that they can take it to the board? I don't know who to direct that to, Your Worship.
Mr. Hack, do you know if...
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Sherwood. Well, just to sort of start at the beginning on that, so we did receive the detailed comments from the BIA, and we were very happy to take those on board. And as it related to the amendment of the boundary of what is called Priority 1 area, which essentially is First Street and Broadway, that sort of nexus, the decision was taken not to include all of the large-scale retail that comprises all of the BIA, but to make some fine-tuning of the boundary, and then to enable certain of the programs to expand to include the BIA, and that detail is in the plan. It's also written up in the summary documents. If it hasn't been communicated directly, I think it's a fairly quick process to be able to bring the BIA up to speed, and I'll certainly offer that if there's any further discussion with the BIA that's warranted, just to explain, verbally the decisions that were taken, we'd certainly be happy to do that. But I think that the solution that we had come to is a fairly good compromise if you look through the plan itself.
Yes, I did read them. I'm quite aware of the comments and concerns being on the board. I know that you came in and took our comments back gracefully, and I appreciate that. But I just think that the board should also be brought to the attention of some of the responses, and perhaps they may still want some other things that they want to work with you on. So if that could be forwarded, that would be much appreciated.
Yeah, I mean, so I think it's so if Mr. Ward or others want to do that, so we're certainly on hand to take a meeting with the BIA board and have any discussion that's necessary, because they're an important partner, obviously, to this process. So.
Thank you very much.
So I'm going to ask Councillor Peters just to recap. So that was, I guess, attachment 6, the design guideline appendix.
Right.
So your motion would be to approve this with the exception of that component, which will be brought back on August the 8th. Is that correct?
Yes, just to defer that one portion of the document.
So Councillor Peters made that motion. I seconded it. Could we have a vote on amending this motion, please?
Mr. Mayor, there's already a motion on the floor.
Great. Okay, let's ask Madam Clerk the correct procedure here then. If
can you hear me, Mr. Mayor?
yes, we can.
Oh, thank you. So I recorded the motion from Councillor Peters and Mayor Brown as an amending motion. So it is appropriate to vote on that amending motion first, and then we can go back to the main motion and vote on that one that's on the floor.
Very good.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. So we're going to vote on Councillor Peters' motion now. Councillor Taylor, did you want to comment before we vote on that?
Just one last question, if I could, Your Worship, and it's through you to Mr. Osmond. And Mr. Osmond, you don't want this to happen. You want this through this evening. That's your advice to this council. Is that correct?
Through Your Worship to Councillor Taylor, what I want to happen, if at all possible, the CIP to be approved with the caveat that, that as Councillor Peters has requested, that we pull that Appendix 5 and Attachment 5 and take a look at the guidelines, and we can do that separately, bring those back in August, have the benefit of those that input, and that would finalize that Attachment 5. However, the CIP
actually number 6, I believe.
Okay, 6. Yeah, 6. I'm sorry. Yes, it is 6, and that would take care of that that update that we're looking for. The intention, of course, is that Councillor Peters would do what he needs to get done, and he would provide that input back to Mr. Ward, and we'll take a look at that for August 8th.
Along with anyone else that felt
Absolutely.
they need to comb through the documents.
Oh, no,
Maybe it's not just me.
very good. Okay, so this amendment to the motion, all in favor? Okay, that's unanimous. Thank you. And then the original motion to approve the CIP, of course, with this amendment. All in favor? All right. Thank you, councillors. Thank you, staff. Moving on, we've got 12.6. This is the proposal for Orangeville Fare Free Transit. The recommendations are as follows. Option 1, that the report INS 2022-048 Orangeville Fare Free Transit be received. And that option 2 is that report INS 2022-048 Orangeville Fare Free Transit be received, and that staff be directed to implement a 2-year pilot project offering free fares on Orangeville Transit System commencing January 21st, 2023, and that staff be directed to update council every 4 months on ridership growth and other impacts and successes associated with this pilot. We have Councillor Peters and then Councillor Taylor. Go ahead. Well, first of all, let's put a motion on the floor. Who wants to make the motion?
It was between the options, Mr. Mayor, so I was going to put one forward if you didn't mind.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thanks. I was going to put forward option 2.
Okay.
Or to vote, and then I guess we'll have a discussion.
Yes, and seconded by Councillor Andrews. Is that correct? Councillor Andrews? Yes. Okay, very good. Now, did you have a comment as well?
Just, yeah, briefly, thank you. I really wanted to thank Mr. Kostelak and his team for putting it together. I know it's sort of an odd ask to be, spending money as opposed to not, but I think that the program has a very good chance to dovetail with this new approach that we voted on a couple months ago, the new hub and really getting more ridership in. Couple that with the potential for electric buses, as Mr. Kostelak put in the report there. And, I think this could really kickstart the transit use in town. And when we think about, again, the users of transit and those that maybe don't have access to a car or, as many transportation options, I think it's a good idea to run the pilot and hopefully we see some success and, this council or whoever's in our chairs can make a call on it when the pilot wraps up. So again, thanks to the team and this council for entertaining that thought.
Very good. Thank you, Councillor Peters. Councillor Taylor and then Councillor Sherwood.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. First of all, I'd like to thank Councillor Peters for bringing this forward. I always applaud innovative thinking. However, my question is to Mr. Kostelak and Mr. Lackey. I read your report with great interest and thank you very much for this. It's lost on me to understand where in this report it says that ridership would increase. There is a reference to the Blues and Jazz Festival, clearly with the ridership going up 40% on one weekend. But to your point, that's a destination. I guess it's lost on me to explain how we would potentially have ridership increase because it's free. Do we have anything from any other municipality that would state that, this $250,000 loss of revenue would ensure that ridership increases?
Mr. Kostelak.
I'll do my best, Your Worship. We don't have statistics from other municipalities. There's very few municipalities that have done this other than for specific target groups, such as seniors or specific events. What we did see, Jazz and Blues was a great example, and that was the one that sort of opened my eyes to doing something free, starting a new system at the same time, and really promoting it does give you an opportunity to entice new riders. And quite honestly, to council, I don't know if it'll be 10% or 50%. My suggestion, though, is one of the real value of doing a pilot is to try something and figure out if it's worth doing permanently or not. We've done them. We've done all kinds of them over time. And in the report, I believe we indicated that, in our opinion, a successful pilot would see ridership increase by 25%. And that's really the question is, through promotion of the new system, through the waiving of fares, are we able to achieve that? And when you start to do the math on when you take into account funding and costs and different things, a 25% increase in ridership will actually bring the net cost per ride to about what we're paying now. So the net cost per ride would be about the same as where we are. but the proof will be in the pudding. It's a 2-year pilot. I do believe 2 years would be required to actually recognize the long-term effects of implementing this. And that, if we can achieve a 25% ridership increase, it'll be a success. But there isn't a lot of data out there, to Councillor Taylor's question, in other communities that are similar to this that you could really make an accurate comparison.
Very good. Thank you. Councillor Sherwood and then Councillor Post.
Yes, Your Worship. I am in support of this. I like the idea of getting ridership on our buses so we can see more people on there. However, I look at this $530,000 loss of revenue over 2 years, thinking that this is going to happen the next term of council. And I wonder, as a current sitting member of this council, do I have the right to reduce $500,000 in revenue for potentially the next council? So this is where I'm torn on it. I think this should be a decision for next council, but like I say, I'm in support of it. I'm just really teeter-tottering with this whole money aspect. So just a comment.
Thank you, Councillor Sherwood. Councillor Post.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I guess I'll respond to Councillor Sherwood first, because I had the same thought initially, and then the more that I thought about it, the more that I thought, the time for this is now for a few reasons. One being that this will allow Mr. Kosliak and his team to really work that into their budget for the 2023 year. And as Councillor Peters alluded to, this will tie in nicely with the new system that we're going to have. I'm in favor of this. I think that we have an opportunity here to do something innovative and to remove barriers to access for people who need those barriers removed. We're, as we've heard, we're in an affordability crisis. There are a lot of people who are struggling to make ends meet. And if we can do something that will help to reduce those barriers and make it easier for our residents to get to and from work or to jump onto our transit system rather than something else, because now they know that they have the opportunity to. I think we've got a great time to do it. And as Mr. Kosliak said, I know that there's not a lot of data, but I'm hoping that we can be one of the municipalities that provides the data for the next municipality, and a 2-year pilot is a great way to do it. So I'm in support of this. I'll be voting to support that. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Councillor Post. We've got families that are facing crisis right now in terms of the inflationary pressures that are on us.
Absolutely.
The cost of gasoline, food is up. I've ridden our transit system, and when I was on there, I was watching to see who's using this. We've got seniors who don't have access to transit other than that. We have some folks who seem to be disadvantaged. We have students riding the transit system. So, this is maybe a good time to implement this to help those people. And again, it's a 2-year program. There'll be some significant data that the future council will be able to evaluate to see if this has got further merit or not. And I hope it does bring a lot more riders. The other interesting thing about the provincial gas tax that comes back to us for transit is that it's measured by population and also by ridership. So I think it's important that staff implements a counting system as people come onto the bus, because if there's no fare to be collected, there's got to be some other way that we count riders, and I presume that that's being worked into this. But if we can produce higher ridership, theoretically, we're going to get more dollars back from the province and maybe mitigate this cost to some extent. So let's go with Councillor Taylor, then we've got a Deputy Mayor, and then Councillor Andrews. Councillor Taylor, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. With great respect to all of my council mates, I think this is a really bad idea. Maybe this shows my right-wing financial feelings, but if I put forward a business plan where I was going to lose $500,000 over 2 years with no proof that it was potentially going to have an ROI, I'd be fired. So to me, I'll be voting against this, and I'll be bringing this up at budget time as we go forward and showing that, this isn't something that we should be doing. I just think we're down the wrong path here, and it's a financial concern that I don't think we should be doing. We've done a great job financially as a team, and I'm not sure this checks all the boxes. Anyway, thanks for hearing my comments.
Okay, Deputy Mayor McIntosh.
Thank you, Your Worship. I know I've been torn on this before in the past. As you said, we're going to get more money back from the government. We just don't know how much. There's also administrative costs, which aren't written down in the report. But you know, I just wonder what the cost would roughly be if we took out the administrative costs. Speeding up the buses, I guess it'll help. There's a lot of positives towards it. I am concerned about the money, as Councillor Taylor is. So, just my 2 cents worth. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Andrews.
Thank you, Your Worship. All kinds of thoughts regarding this. I think that we're in times where we do have a number of our residents who are struggling, and at the same time, the cost to implement this has been discussed. I think one of the critical pieces that will be important, and Your Worship, you did reference in an earlier agenda item, our new communications manager who will be, I guess, formally announced. This would be one of those critical pieces. You highlighted in your comment there some of the users that you've had an opportunity to see. Students will also be very, very much a part of this. And I think that communication to those to increase ridership, to leverage opportunities to financially support this will be very, very important. So a comment at this point, and we will see how the voting goes.
Very good. Yeah, I mean, all public transit systems are very, very heavily subsidized. Our parks and recreation programs are heavily subsidized. So, I'd like to see this transit system in the best possible light. I'd like to see ridership increase. I think, 2 years from now, if the changes that have been made to the transit system do not create a better ridership, particularly with a free fare, we may have to look at the viability of the public transit system as a whole, because it I believe has been a failure. And that's why I'm in favor of going all in to see if we can do whatever we can, including the transit hub, better transit route system. Of course, the Hanson development and the connection of Hanson is going to be added into this, and so the whole town's going to be served by this. If the future council determines that the fare structure needs to be reinstituted, so be it. But by that time, hopefully we'll have some committed transit users, and the rate on transit's fairly low as it is right now, and I presume we can return to that level if we do so desire. So, Councillor Taylor, you wanted to make another comment?
Just a question, if I could. Well, maybe a comment. So we did do this previously, right? We've done this during the pandemic, and admittedly, nobody was going anywhere regardless. So it's probably not a good comparison, but ridership didn't necessarily increase during the pandemic. So anyway, we kind of did that. But I guess my ask would be, would council consider at all, like 2 years, like guys, I'm always in to try whatever we can. And I like the way you framed it, Sandy. Like I'm all in on whatever we can do to make things better in the town, and we should be trying these things. But 2 years is that's a long time to really play out. Like I would suggest 6 months, and then you course correct and go from there.
Well, Councillor Taylor, it's been frustrating for me to watch the Edelbrock Transit Hub be delayed after delay after delay. I think we approved this somewhere 2 years ago. We can point to the pandemic, but it's been very disappointing that hasn't been implemented yet to see. And also, we also approved this on-call transit, which actually is increasing the cost per fare or per rider, I guess. So yeah. I don't know that a year is enough time, Councillor Taylor. That's all. I mean, we're probably not.
With your money, Sandy, would you go for 2 years though? If it was your own money, I don't.
But Councillor Taylor, we've got a windfall of over $30 million that is now sitting.
This is that's the wrong path, Sandy. You know that.
Well, I don't know that it is. It's
just because we have money doesn't mean
including $10 million of that money was taken from the taxpayer over 20 years, and
we shouldn't be spending it in a way that's inappropriate.
Well, no, I think helping those who are less fortunate is part of what we do, and I'm fully supportive of this. Anyway,
I
we
just
can
don't-
debate
the
this
argument about us
forever,
having
Councillor
money isn't
Taylor.
appropriate.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Very good. Is there anything else you wanted to say, Councillor Taylor, or no? We go
No,
on
sir,
to Councillor
thank you.
Peters. Councillor Peters? No, we're good.
That's okay. Thanks.
Okay, so we have a motion on the floor. This is option 2, and that is to move forward with a 2-year pilot project with free transit. All in favor? And opposed? Let the record stand that Councillor Taylor is opposed. Thank you, councillors. All right, moving on to correspondence. We have some correspondence received from Credit Valley Conservation, their audited financial statements. We have a letter from Headwaters Healthcare with changes to their COVID restrictions, and another letter from Headwaters regarding the assessment center and Dufferin Cold and Flu Clinic. Can we have a motion to receive those 3 items of correspondence, please? Councillor Andrews, seconded by Deputy Mayor McIntosh. Councillor Andrews, do you wish to comment on this? Go ahead, sir.
I do, and this is just a very quick question, if Madam Treasurer is available. I just needed some clarification, and this may also be for the general public that might be viewing. The difference between the general levy and the special levy. I saw this in the report. So just for clarification, is that something that you might be able to provide us clarification at this time, or?
Thank you for the question, Councillor Andrews. Through you, Your Worship, to Councillor Andrews. Clearly, the financial statements belongs to a separate entity.
Yeah.
I'll do my level best. I believe the general levy is for operating cost, and the special levy is for any special projects. I believe that would be the distinction, but I would be more than happy to get that information for you.
We have
Okay,
a board member on our council in Councillor Peters. I think he could add some things to this. So go ahead, sir.
Certainly. Thanks, Mr. Mayor, and through you to Councillor Andrews. I can't opine on the history of it, but the special levy is paid by Peel Region for projects within Peel Region. And as you'll recall, the CVC boundary is about 90% within Peel. The other municipalities make up a very small amount. So to the Treasurer's point, the general levy are the portions that come from all the municipalities at the lower tier. And then the special levy is the region of Peel's contribution. And inevitably, some of that does help fund projects all over, but they're sort of the main backer of those initiatives at CVC.
Thank you.
Councillor Peters.
Did you have another comment, Councillor Peters, or you were just weighing in on Councillor Andrews' question? Okay, very good. All right, any further questions on those letters of correspondence? All in favor of receiving? Thank you. Moving on to committee and board minutes. We have items 14.1, just a sec here. 14.1 through 14.10. These are minutes of various town boards or committees. The Business and Economic Development Advisory Committee of March 22nd. Heritage Orangeville minutes from March 17th, April 21st, May 19th, and June 16th. The Official Plan Steering Committee minutes of May the 12th. Orangeville BIA minutes of April 21st and 26th. Police Service Board minutes of May 17th, and the Orangeville Public Library Board minutes of April 27th. We have a motion to receive these minutes, please. Councillor Sherwood, second by Councillor Post. Any questions or comments on the minutes? Go ahead, Councillor Andrews.
Thank you. Very quickly to the Police Board Chair, Councillor Taylor. Councillor Taylor, I noticed that Councillor, I should say, Constable Roach, who is our Community Services Liaison Constable, who does a tremendous job along with her team there, but there was a reference in the minutes to the Neighborhood Watch Program. And is there any update that you might be able to provide council and the general public who are watching tonight? Because I know the word in the community has kind of gotten out there that there's something happening, but I don't know if there's any updates that you might be able to provide at this time.
Yeah, thanks very much, Councillor Andrews. So this actually, I just got to put my dates here together. I believe in early May or late April, this was actually brought to a joint meeting of all the police services boards in Dufferin County. And Constable Roach did a great job expanding on that program and telling us the merits of it. And then there was two individuals, and one of them was Ms. Sarah Clark, who's a resident here in town, was very interested in potentially running that program within the town. And so this was presented by Constable Roach, and the citizens were talking about would there be enough interest to get this up and running. And since that time, it's gone quiet. You know, in fairness, I mean, it is summertime, but I haven't heard where those two ladies stand with moving that forward, and I haven't linked back in with Constable Roach since the meeting. But it would be a citizen-led piece with a liaison to our local police force. So we'll find out where it's at, and I guess I'll make sure I report back to you and let you know, Councillor Andrews.
Thank you very much, Councillor Taylor.
If I could weigh in for a moment here, 5 or 6 years ago, the Orangeville Police Service brought this forward, and there was a call for volunteers, and it brought bupkis. So with all due respect, those who neighborhood watch programs are difficult to implement. You have to have dedicated people, and I don't know that doing it for free is reasonable, and that people are actually going to put their hand up. So we tried it. I can tell you, Chief Kalinsky and his team 5 or 6 years ago, there were meetings. I attended them, as did other people, and when it came right down to it,
Okay.
it was
Councillor
not viable.
Post and I were at that as well. It was at ODSS, and quite a few people, to your point, Your Worship, were very interested in that. You're right, and then it just didn't seem to get off the ground. Anyway, we'll see where this incarnation is, and I'll let you know.
And I think you know, to the police service, whether it's OPS or OPP, there's a great deal of administrative work that they have to be burdened with as a result of this. And you know, I'm skeptical about whether or not it would be able to get off the ground and be administered properly throughout the town of 30,000 people. So I hope it does, but you know, I know OPP is doing a great job. They're responding quickly to issues, and you know, I don't feel unsafe in any neighborhood in Orangeville. So I hope most people do not feel unsafe. Things like car break-ins, where this has been going on for decades. People leaving their car open and having things stolen from their cars. We're hearing about this. People are complaining about it. Lock your car, folks. You know, keep wary of people walking in your neighborhood. We do have people in the middle of the night skulking around. So, and we do have people calling those ne'er-do-wells into the OPP, and they're responding. So, but I hope something happens, but it's been tried in this town before and was not successful. So we're at Councillor Andrews. Thanks for your question, and Councillor Taylor for that response from PSP.
If I may, just you brought up such a great point there, and I feel I just want to plug this a little bit, and that is, if people see things, they should call the OPP and report it. There needs to be a record, and if there's a record of more than one individual, say for fun they got 3 to 5 all worried about a certain issue, then the OPP can focus their resources on that one spot. So anyway, Your Worship, your comments are spot on, and I just wish more people would do that, because it would give a record and we would get the attention to those key areas.
I even read an article in the past 2 or 3 days of somebody who called in an unusual car parked on their street. Was there for a couple of days. Nobody knew whose car it was. Turns out it was stolen and had been parked there to cool off by the thieves. So again, if you see an unusual vehicle, particularly a new model vehicle that's sitting on your street that nobody's making claim to, it could be a stolen vehicle and you should be calling it in. And that particular article I read, when the police showed up, they ran the VIN number and the plate and found it was a stolen vehicle. So,
did you get your car back?
Wasn't mine, no, but you know, car theft is something that is out there for sure. I don't think we've had a lot of it here, but certainly in the city it's rampant, so it's unfortunate. All right, so we're at a point now to vote on receipt of these minutes. All in favor? Thank you, councillors. Next, we have a notice of motion prior to meeting by Councillor Peters. Councillor Peters, maybe you could just give us the Coles notes on this and the reasons for it, if you wouldn't mind, sir.
Sure. So this was one that I brought up about a month ago, but I knew I was going to miss last meeting, so the clerk was kind enough to delay it to this one. I did not write this motion. This was something I came across in, the municipal world, and as this council knows, I think the lower tiers have an obligation to push for some policy change at the provincial level, and this one specifically has to do with the building code as it relates to energy efficiency. We've pushed for some larger developments in town to go beyond the code requirements, knowing that it is fully feasible and within best practices to do so. This encourages the province to pull up their bootstraps a little and continue to accelerate the code requirements as it relates to energy efficiency and carbon emissions. So this is really just an advocacy piece that I think all municipalities can get behind, as we want all the development that's coming to our towns and our cities to be as clean and green and sustainable as possible.
All right, so we're going to send some correspondence in support of this to the province, to the appropriate parties. I think it's a good initiative, and we need to look at these types of building code enhancements going forward. So I'm supportive of it. All right, so Councillor Peters is making this motion. Would somebody like to second it? Councillor Post, any further comments? All in favor? Very good. Thank you, Councillor Peters. I'm having trouble here with my computer. Sorry, folks. As we get down here, any notices of motion at meeting? Councillor Post, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I'll just give kind of a bit of background first. So back on Monday, June 13th, 2022, OPP divers located the body of 11-year-old Draven Graham in the Scugog River after he'd gone missing from his family's home on the Sunday afternoon. Now, this is every parent's worst nightmare, but for families of children with autism or other special needs, that fear is enhanced because it's quite common for neurodiverse children to wander away. And in the autism world, they call that elopement. But even more frightening than that, to be nonverbal or have limited language skills, making them unable to call out if they need assistance or if they're in danger, or even in response to their name. So an alert system similar to the Amber Alert system that notifies cell phones in the area could have had a significant impact in this search and in other searches. But the criteria for the Amber Alert system is limited to suspected abductions where descriptions of possible abductors or their vehicles are available. Autism advocates across the province are calling on the provincial government to create that system. They're asking for it to be called the Draven Alert in memory of Draven Graham. And the intent of the Draven Alert would be to notify the public very quickly about missing children who are autistic or vulnerable or have special needs. In today's agenda package under the information items, you probably noticed the information item. It was a notice of motion or a motion that was shared with us by the municipality of Brighton. Their council was the first to call on the provincial government to implement this system, and they passed a unanimous motion to send a letter to Premier Doug Ford, the Solicitor General, and to the Commissioner of the OPP. I don't want to reinvent the wheel here tonight. Brighton did a really great job with their motion. So all that I'm asking is that we move forward the same motion. I've just edited their numbers just a little bit that have changed, and I've added the addition of staff sending the letter with our endorsement to this motion to those listed above, but as well as our MPP and Deputy Premier Sylvia Jones. I would also ask tonight that council would support us waiving notice to get these letters sent as soon as possible. For the benefit of those in the public or for anybody who hasn't read the notice of motion that came from Brighton, I'll just read it off quickly. It is a little long, so I'll do the best I can to read it quickly here. Whereas the Ontario Amber Alert system is a warning system that quickly alerts the public of a suspected abduction of children who are in imminent danger, and whereas the goal is to broadcast as much information about the child, the abductor, and suspect vehicles as quickly as possible so that the public can respond with any relevant information that might lead to the child's safe return. And whereas people are encouraged to share the Amber Alert with as many people as possible, if a child or vulnerable person is abducted, spreading the information quickly is critical to their safe return. And whereas an Amber Alert makes the public aware to keep an eye out for the child, vulnerable person, suspect, and the vehicles described in the alert. If they spot them, try and gather as many details as they can, including the specific location where they saw them, the time, the direction they were traveling in, and any other identifying details that will help to locate them. And whereas an Amber Alert gives citizens instructions to call 911 or the phone number included in the alert immediately if they have a trip or a sighting related to the Amber Alert, an Amber Alert will only be activated if the police have confirmed that an abduction has taken place and there is reason to believe the victim is in danger of serious physical injury, and there is information available that, if broadcast to the public, could assist in the safe recovery of the victim. And whereas it is essential to remember that an Amber Alert is not always appropriate in every circumstance, and that their continued effectiveness depends on ensuring that they are only used in cases that meet that above criteria. And whereas the recent tragic death of 11-year-old Draven Graham showed that Amber Alert system is flawed when it comes to vulnerable children who can go missing but are not abducted. And whereas at the time this motion was written, there have been over 90,000 citizens who had signed a petition on change.org requesting that a Draven Alert be created. And whereas it is clear that there needs to be an addition to the alert system to allow for law enforcement to send out an alert for vulnerable children who go missing under circumstances that do not involve an abduction, but are at serious risk of injury or death. Therefore, be it resolved that the municipality of Orangeville and its council endorse the following: that the Minister of the Solicitor General and the Commissioner of the Ontario Provincial Police, as well as the Premier's office, be requested to make the necessary changes to the Amber Alert system and create a new alert called the Draven Alert, which will protect vulnerable children who have not been abducted but who are at higher risk of danger, injury, or death, and alert the public that they are missing. And number 2, that letters be sent to Premier Doug Ford, Solicitor General Michael Kersner, OPP Commissioner Thomas Carrique, and to our MPP and Deputy Premier Sylvia Jones.
Thank you, Councillor Post.
Thank
Councillor Post has a motion to waive notice on this. Can we have a seconder? Councillor Peters, all in favor of waiving notice? Councillor Post has a motion on the floor. Anybody wish to second that motion? Deputy Mayor McIntosh, any further comment on this? Deputy Mayor and then Councillor Taylor.
Yeah, obviously I will support this 100%. I just hope the government does a better job with this alert than they do with the actual Amber Alert, because there's so many problems that we're still having with that. I just hope they get this right. Thank you.
Councillor Taylor.
I think this is a very benevolent thing to do. Of course, it sounds like the right thing to do. I guess, Councillor Post, for me, normally you and I are on the same page on most things, it seems, but I would have preferred to have waited the 2 weeks and just had a chance to read it and digest it. That was a lot to take in. I'll vote in favor, but I would have preferred that we didn't waive and that we had a chance to digest over the meeting times.
Councillor Post.
Mr. Mayor, thank you very much. Through you to Councillor Taylor. I normally would have left it with the notice, but because it was the same motion that was in our information package, I assumed that the majority had read it and had already kind of seen what was going on in the media. So,
fair.
Yeah, I think as Deputy Mayor said, there's going to be some issues, I think, with implementing it. I know that the police data and health data are separate and they do not cross, and sometimes they probably should. How you're going to be able to ascertain who falls under this category and who doesn't? Are the police just going to take a phone call from somebody that says, hey, my kid falls under this category? How do they double check this? I mean, there's going to be some issues, but it was a terrible tragedy that happened. We certainly don't want another one to happen, and I'm willing to push this on to others to do a deeper dive into this, which I'm sure they will do at the provincial level. Okay, any further comments or questions? All in favor of Councillor Post's motion to move this forward? All right, thank you, councillors and Councillor Post. New business. Anybody wish to comment on any new business? Councillor Post and then Councillor Andrews.
it appears that I am full of talking today. I just wanted to share with council, in case they hadn't heard, and with the community, this is a celebration. The Canadian Lacrosse Hall of Fame announced its 2022 inductees just recently, and an Orangeville local lacrosse legend, Josh Sanderson, was honored as part of this elite list. I took some information from his bio that was listed. Josh was born in Orangeville and was Rookie of the Year in 1994. He was MVP in 1996, and he led the league in scoring in both 1996 and 98. As a member of the Orangeville Northmen, Josh was part of winning 3 Minto Cups, and he went on to play senior lacrosse with Brampton, where he won 3 Mann Cup championships. When Josh retired from over 20 seasons with the NLL, he was the 4th highest scorer in NLL history, having scored 482 goals and 972 assists. So I just wanted to give council the opportunity to send congratulations to Josh Sanderson. He continues to make Orangeville very proud.
Thank you, Councillor Post. Councillor Andrews.
Thank you, Your Worship. Well done, Mr. Sanderson. The date was July 1st. It's July the 11th, and since our last council meeting, we haven't had an opportunity to reference this, but I just wanted to take the time to thank Sharon Doherty and the entire crew that was responsible for the Canada Day celebrations, not only at the Alder complex, but various points within our community. Did a tremendous job, and was really delighted to see the number of people that came out, shared some cake and some fun at the same time.
Thanks, Councillor Andrews. Councillor Taylor.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. 2 things. One is this weekend is Ribfest. Yours truly will be there doing whatever they tell me I need to do. I think I'm slugging beer cases, so very important work, but I'd encourage everybody to go. They are still looking for volunteers. So if they like that, maybe I don't want to give somebody's email out that maybe doesn't want it, but you could email me atttaylor@orangeville.ca. and I could put you in touch with whomever is required, but it's always a great time. And then the second thing I wanted to bring up is since we're not meeting again until August, Theatre Orangeville is once again having their Fringe Festival. And I think it's best at this point to go ahead. You can see what the tickets and the shows are by going to the Theatre Orangeville website here in town. And we went pre-COVID, which it's been at least 3 years since. Maybe it's only 2. It's all running together now since we've been able to have the Fringe Festival North here. But I would encourage everyone to go and support our local theatre.
Very good. Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Councillor Peters.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. And another event happening this week is that the Communities in Bloom judges will be visiting town. And this is a competition we've done several years in a row now with, of course, with a break for COVID. We are being judged nationally, but non-competitive. So if you were planning on doing some gardening or litter pickup or something later in the week, maybe bump that ahead a couple days. They'll be here Tuesday and Wednesday, and we'll be taking them all over town, showing them all the great things we have here.
Very good. Thank you, Councillor Peters. Any other comments, councillors? No. Very good. Madam Clerk or Mr. Bonato, do we have any questions from the public?
Through you, Your Worship, there is currently nobody on the line.
All right. Thank you very much. Moving on to item 19. Just a sec again, I'm having some computer issues here. Okay, so these are the bylaws. I'll read them off again. Bylaws listed below be read 3 times and finally passed. This is a bylaw. Sorry, I've lost it again here. I'm having computer issues. Is 19.4 the last one, folks? Can anybody confirm that? There's 5? Okay, I can't.
Maybe the clerk could read it off for you, Your Worship.
I'm unable, but we've got bylaws 19.1 through 19.5. Could we have a motion to approve those bylaws, please? Deputy Mayor, seconded by Councillor Post. Councillor Taylor, you're lit up again, sir, or did you
I'm
have
sorry, sir.
another question?
My apologies.
All right. Any comments on these bylaws, folks? Councillor Sherwood.
I just wanted to congratulate Miss McDonald on her appointment of Deputy Clerk. We are very lucky to have such an individual working for our corporation.
Yes, absolutely. Well done, Tracy McDonald, our new Deputy Clerk. Thank you very much, Councillor Sherwood, for bringing that forward. I guess Madam Clerk, bylaw number 19.3 has been amended, removing attachment 6. So council, just, do we need to make a motion to amend that at this point, Madam Clerk?
I will ask for confirmation from Mr. Ward on this or Ms. Syed. I don't believe as though the design guidelines fall under the community improvement plan. The plan itself makes mention of the guidelines, but is not included in the plan. The guidelines is an auxiliary document that's meant to be flexible. So I don't believe as though it's covered under the bylaw that is approving the plan, but if Mr. Ward can just confirm that.
Mr. Ward.
That's correct, Your Worship. The bylaw doesn't need to be amended. It makes no reference to the guidelines itself.
Very good. Okay, so all in favor of these 5 bylaws? Thank you. And could we have a motion to adjourn, please? Councillor Taylor, second by Councillor Post, all in favor? All right, folks. All the best. We'll see you soon.
Night all.
Good evening, everyone. Night.